Hey guys, here we go again. No script. I'm just hot under the collar. Summa tangentum. Here we go. I just tried to watch the extra credits Stop Normalizing Nazis in Video Games video. This is the worst video I've seen on the topic of video games. Really, it is a textbook example of irrational argumentation. It's one of the worst I've ever seen. So I gave up on extra credits years ago. During Gamergate, I didn't have a channel. I didn't really have a Twitter account. I just sort of paid attention to it. And of course, there's all this, heat and insanity about Gamergate. So all I'm going to say is basically, if you were a video game channel and you didn't take the opportunity to speak out against the censorious tendency of the left towards video games, I stopped caring about what you had to say on the topic of video games, because I don't care about the opinion of censors. If you want to censor books, I don't care about your opinion on literature. If you're either okay with censorship or you're just standing by and using the same bumper stickers as the left-wing censors of video games, I don't care about your opinions on the medium anymore. Basically, my perspective on extra credits is they think they are the cool, cerebral defenders of video games, discussing the high art of video games. But what they actually are crotchety old boomers sitting on their porch complaining about kids these days and their video games. Now, the other thing about this video, I've seen a couple really good videos that take apart their argument piece by piece that go on for 40 minutes. And since people have done a good job of doing that, I'm not going to do that here. I really want to hone in, try to, on one concrete point, because the extra credits video is such a good illustration of bad faith, awful rhetorical tactics. So the other thing extra credits did that I didn't like is, after laying out their case, I think their case is irrational. I think it's full of factual errors. They basically didn't think through the basics of how video games work, I'll link to a video by Tildeer and a video by Upper Echelon Gaming, taking them apart. Basically, Tildeer looks at the history of World War II and argues that extra credits has a naive understanding of World War II. Upper Echelon Gaming thinks about, the implications of some of their proposals and how this would effectively destroy multiplayer, shooting video games, and they haven't really thought this through. So I'll link you to those for full thoughts on that. But what I really didn't like about the extra credits video is then they follow up with a comment where they say, "Hey guys, don't take us out of context. Don't say we said things we didn't say," when it's the logical implications of what they said. Their video, for all of its problems, laid out their moral perspectives. They're censors, they're totalitarians, they're crotchety old boomers who complain about kids these days and their video games. Yet they don't deserve any attention from anyone who cares about video games. And then in their comment section, they tried to say, we meant something else than what we said in the video. Now, if I said that extra credits are crotchety old boomers complaining about kids and their video games today, and I said that crotchety old boomers don't deserve any rights to free speech, that their opinions on video games should be banned by the government should break into their house, take away their video games, and give those to little kids who are actually good at video games, and then I just stopped there, what would you conclude from those two premises? Well, from those two premises, you would conclude that I think that extra credits specifically should not have any free speech rights. The government should specifically just ban extra credits for being so stupid. No free speech for you. And they should break into their house, steal all their video games from them, and give those to kids who actually play video games. That would be entirely fair, right? But then I'd say, oh, no. I didn't mean that the government should break into extra credits' house and steal their video games. How dare you put words in my mouth? So basically, they're tendentious hacks who are not willing to take their own argument to its logical conclusion. And both of the videos I'm going to link to, Upper Echelon Gaming and Tildeer, they do a really good job of walking through their argument, the rational problems of it. It's full of the extra credits video is full of straw manning, the bad guy who thinks that the video game is okay and it's okay to have World War II games with Nazis in it. He's a white guy with gross faces. And the good people who agree with extra credits, they're marginalized people. They're so pleasant. It's that kind of gross, cheap emotional argumentation. Now that rant's out of the way, I have 2 points I want to get across that I didn't hear Upper Echelon Gaming or Tildeer come across. Can I do it? All right. Point number one, what extra credits did is far more offensive than the World War II game they're complaining about is. Their basic argument is Battlefield 5. I don't play the Battlefield games. Their argument is Battlefield 5 is offensive to Holocaust survivors because in the multiplayer campaign of a world, not the multiplayer, player versus player. Am I letting you know how much I've not played Battlefield? You can play online matches, and because it's a World War II game, that means one side are the Allied soldiers, and one side are German soldiers, not necessarily Nazis. And they think this normalizes Nazi behaviors. They think that a young person will go to a Nazi website and will be desensitized to Nazi imagery. It's the Jack Thompson video games create violent school shooters argument all over again. But it's actually worse than the Jack Thompson argument, because at least you could say that video games celebrate violence. That's actually a true part of a lot of video games. But Jack Thompson's argument is still nonsense, but this is even more tenuous. Now add like a conspiracy theory to Jack Thompson, and you will have my opinion of extra credits. All right, so the reason that extra credits are offensive, and I basically suspect they're alt-right crypto-fascists, is they are grabbing Holocaust survivors by the hair and shoving them in your face and saying, hey, you problematic gamers, accept our irrational argument, or you are basically spitting on this Holocaust survivor and shaking the Holocaust survivor by their hair. Extra credits. The Holocaust survivors did not get together and vote for you to be the representative of Holocaust survivors. Now, maybe if you go looking, you could probably find a crotchety old boomer Holocaust survivor who's just like you, extra credits, and complains all day about kids these days in their video games. Why don't they just play outside like we used to? I'm sure you could find a Holocaust survivor who thinks that, but it's not true just because they're a Holocaust survivor. What I think is a lot of old school dudes are actually pretty cool. And if you find, I bet a lot of Holocaust survivors would get if you explain to them that basically what the video game is you're fighting Nazis in the story mode, so it's portraying Nazis as bad, and in the multiplayer mode, one side plays the Allies, one side plays the Nazis, and they'd probably think, oh, okay, that's kind of like, when my kids used to play in the backyard and pretend to fight the Nazis. That's harmless. I think that most boomers are actually pretty cool, and they aren't the crotchety old guy complaining about kids these days in their games, like Extra Credits is. But Extra Credits has basically siphoned all of that boomer energy off of old people and Jack Thompson and imbued that into themselves. So shame on you, Extra Credits. That is truly offensive. I don't think you should say things are offensive to dismiss an argument. So their argument isn't wrong because it's offensive. Their argument is wrong because it's irrational, pathetic, it's full of straw mans. It's so poorly thought out, they haven't considered really basic questions of how games actually work. They think they could punish the people playing the German soldiers, but what it would actually do is it would just make everyone wait and break the game. They are so stupid. All right, so that was point number one I wanted to get across, is Extra Credits is fine stamping on the graves of Holocaust victims and shaking Holocaust survivors by the hair and stuffing them in your face to try to add moral outrage to their irrational ideas about video games. That's point number one. And point number two is, of course, they haven't thought through the implications of this. So I want to give you a specific example that neither Tildeer or Upper Echelon Gaming talked about that I think is really, really important. If the argument is the depiction of a Nazi or just a German soldier who isn't necessarily a Nazi in the context of a World War II era video game is offensive to Holocaust survivors, therefore what? That's the problem, is because Extra Credits are so full of BS, they never, it's hard to ever pin them down. But what we can all tell, the logical implication of that is games like Battlefield 5 shouldn't exist. You shouldn't have games where you play as an Allied soldier and you fight a Nazi, or you could play as a Nazi and fight Allied soldiers. It's pretty straightforward what they want until they started lying and pretending they were saying something other than what they said in the video. Okay, let's take that to its logical conclusion. Why should it be any different for fictional universes like fantasy universes or sci-fi universes where Nazis have inspired the bad guys in the universe? Star Wars. What do the officer uniforms in Star Wars look like? They look like brown shirts. They look like German officers. What are the name of the main unit in Star Wars for the Empire? Stormtroopers. George Lucas literally named the soldiers in the Empire after Nazi units because he wanted to use that as a shorthand. He wanted you to watch the movie, hear the word stormtroopers, see the uniforms, and think bad guy, because George Lucas understands that almost every American especially almost instinctively looks at Nazi stuff and says bad guy. It's a great shorthand little storytelling technique, all right? But the argument from Extra Credits is a Holocaust survivor could be offended by this imagery. It could desensitize a young man and make him susceptible to real Nazis, okay? Well, that applies to fictional settings. Then, if it applies to World War II era games, there are games where you can play as stormtroopers in a Star Wars game. And they have the regalia, they have the uniforms, they have the red and black logo symbol, kind of like a Nazi swastika. So, if we were to take their argument seriously, that Nazi imagery could desensitize you to Nazism and therefore make you a Nazi, then it's so obvious. Obviously, the playing as a stormtrooper in a Star Wars game could also desensitize you to fascism and make you a literal Nazi. So the reason I want to talk about this is the Extra Credits video is almost the perfect example of everything that's been wrong with the culture. And this is true everywhere. If you are not a gamer, this matters. This matters to comic books. This matters to novels. This matters to sci-fi. This matters to cyberpunk. In every single area of life, things that I'm not into. I'm not into D&D. This is in D&D. I'm not into cyberpunk. They're talking about this in cyberpunk. I'm not into, sci-fi fiction. This is about the Hugo Awards. I'm not into Star Wars anymore. This is infecting the Star Wars fandom. Everyone is talking about how these media could potentially lead to Nazism. It's scare tactics. It's despicable. Oh, I'm so frustrated. But I lost the train of thought. So the reason you should force yourself to watch the Extra Credits video is this encapsulates everything we need to defeat. I'm done trying to persuade hacks like Extra Credits what's wrong with their argument, because they have abandoned logical argumentation. They are being disingenuous. They aren't even thinking through the implications of their own argument. I got the train back. The point is, if you were to take their argument seriously, it's not just video games set in a World War II era where you have combatants on both sides fighting each other in a multiplayer match. That's not the only thing that would be impossible. Fiction is impossible if you take these implications seriously. If the imaginary victim that we're grabbing by the hair and trying to thrust into people's faces to lend emotional weight to our bad arguments, if what they could potentially object to is an argument, that person could potentially object to anything. They could object to Star Wars. They could object to the Nazi images being used for bad guys in fictional settings. So that's a non-argument. Nothing can be made. No creativity. No fun. No sci-fi. No fantasy. Nothing. You cannot escape the problem of this ideology coming into your hobby. They want control of your hobby. It was gaming in 2014. It was comic books starting in 2016. It'll be whatever the next virtual reality hobby that people come up with that's a lot of fun. These same Extra Credit style boomers are going to want to control it. They're going to want to dictate to everybody and pontificate while pretending that there's some sort of cerebral, thoughtful arbiter of the discussion of what is and what isn't appropriate in your hobby. Enough. I'm done with it. So you should find a way to watch the Extra Credits video without giving them the views. I think Tildeer and Upper Echelon Gaming did a really good job of fairly presenting their argument. So don't even give Extra Credits the views and the ad revenue they don't deserve. Their opponents did a very fine job of presenting Extra Credits' argument fairly, and Extra Credits didn't do a good job presenting objections to their arguments at all, so why even give them the traffic? My gosh. So, what can we do? I don't know. It feels like most of the consumer revolts, or the attempt to say no to this stuff, have ultimately failed. Like, Gamergate is portrayed as a harassment campaign on Wikipedia. It's basically been decided by the powers that be in the media that it didn't matter if you had a legitimate argument. in favor of Gamergate in 2014. The whole movement has been labeled an evil alt-right anti-woman harassment campaign. Same thing happened to Comicsgate. Of course it would, because there's no way you can behave yourself and be polite and make a coherent, rational argument addressing their points if your enemy wants to destroy you. If your enemy wants to censor you, you cannot argue with them rationally about the terms of your censorship. You can't make a forceful case trying to persuade them that your ideas that they want to censor, that your ideas are actually good. Because they've essentially said, we're done with the argument. We're done arguing with you. We're going to censor you now. So there are very few things where I say, you shouldn't be willing to debate it. I think you should be willing to debate any topic with someone who actually is willing to debate you. But you don't debate with censors, because censors aren't actually interested in debating with you. They're just going to waste your time and pretend to debate with you while really they're trying to censor you. So extra credits. You're Nazis, and you hate Holocaust survivors. Go away, you awful, awful boomers. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Laughing to keep from crying. That's the secret. Jesus is Lord. If the whole world goes to hell tomorrow, I'm okay. but it's kind of depressing. Love you. Catch you later.